Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. And a couple of days ago now, we talked about the XM4 being gentleman's agreemented from professional player. After a couple of months now with the AK-47 being gone and all this drama that happened before the season even started, the XM4 came into play for stage 1. We thought we might get quite a nice personal preference meta. The Krig on some occasions, the XM4 on some occasions, the 74U as the main SMG. That is clearly not the case. The XM4 gets GA'd a few days ago, but some players, especially Octane, very frustrated with how this one has been gone. I mean, especially as a main assault rifle, I'm sure it's really frustrating to see your XM4 being deleted, whereas the SMG players in the scene right now get to only get rid of one attachment. And kind of the trade-off between the two is frustrating Octane, and I'm sure some other players right now. Intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Like if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you are new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Thank you very much indeed for doing that. Let's hop into things then. So as we say, XM4 GA'd a few days ago now, and this is what we talked about at the time. As Chrome says, FaZe, Subliners and Surge were the teams against the recent GAs. We talked about at the time, pretty interestingly, that OpTic, for example, were in favour of the GA, and I suppose knowing that maybe the QBZ would come in and it would actually be playing still as kind of a 2 assault rifle meta. Because if you're OpTic, you really don't want the meta to be 3 SMGs, I don't think, but as it is right now with Dashy on the QBZ, it's clearly working out to great effect for them, I believe, in scrims. We'll have a look at some of their results against Dallas here in a couple of minutes' time. But yeah, Surge were against it, and understandably so, right? They've got good assault rifles on their team. Their SMGs aren't exactly dominant forces in the league, and therefore you're probably thinking if you're them, you want to keep the assault rifles as good as you can, and the SMGs don't necessarily get too much advantage, because the problem is you give these SMGs to a guy like aBeZy and Simp, and yeah, they're just going to run riot, right? Especially with the XM4 no longer in the game. So effectively what was done at the time is that the XM4 would be deleted out of the title, and we talked quite a lot, and he also mentions in this video there was other suggestions, for example getting rid of Gunfighter, which getting rid of the 7 attachments on the XM4, only allowing 5 attachments on it, and that actually might have made a significant amount of difference, because I do believe, and I'm at least somewhat concerned, that we may have exactly the same thing happen with the QBZ as has happened with the XM4 and the AK-47, right? Because, okay, the attachments being gone maybe is the thing to do, because the problem is you get rid of an actual weapon, and now the next weapon just becomes the same thing again. And Octane mentions in this video the fact that actually from a number of perspectives, especially when you look at the headshot multiplier, the QBZ could actually be considered better than the XM4 in certain circumstances, which really does mean, like, is it only a matter of time until the QBZ is also gone, and the pros have just made a pretty poor decision once again. So the idea was, okay, the XM4 would go, and in exchange for that, it's kind of an interesting dynamic between the assault rifle players and the SMG players. The SMG players want what benefits them, the assault rifle players want what benefits them, of course, understandably so. So the idea was, okay, the XM4 would go, and in exchange, the 74U would get some sort of nerf to it. Now the nerf turned out to be getting rid of the muzzle brake, and also agreeing that they would use no mag attachments to give it no 40 rounds, which really isn't a major nerf, especially for a guy like aBeZy and some of the best SMGs in the game. They're going to shoot laser beams regardless if it has a few % more recoil or not. They're just going to learn to control it. Not too much of a big deal. Therefore, Octane believes effectively the XM4 has been gone for absolutely nothing, and they're very frustrated with the matter. Now the QBZ coming into the game, of course, seems to have favoured certain players over others. Dashy's been looking very good with it so far. It's certainly an interesting weapon, but headshots actually matter quite a lot on this gun. It has a 1.4 headshot multiplier, I believe, which means if you can hit your headshots, maybe there is an element of natural gun skill, right, in terms of if you can actually aim and hit headshots like you kind of could with the Krig at the start of the game, then before that headshot multiplier got nerfed on that from, I believe, 1.4 down to 1.2 or 1.3 to 1.2, something like that, so it wasn't quite as proficient. I think back in the start of the game, if you just hit 1 headshot with the Krig, you would get a 4-shot kill, which is very strong indeed, and I think it's a pretty similar thing actually here with the QBZ, and the XM4 didn't have quite the same thing, so maybe you could argue there is actually a lot more skill to using the QBZ from certain elements, but at the same time, you could also look at this and say, is it only a matter of time until the QBZ is also gone, because I think pros are maybe going to realise in not too long that it actually is very good indeed, and the European amateurs have already decided to get rid of it. As Octane says at the time, AK gone, M4 gone, while Sublet is asking what attachment should I take off. Mind blown at this one, folks, truly flabbergasted. And interestingly, Luti explained some of the reasoning behind the QBZ GA in the European region, and they effectively decided to get rid of it because they believe it's just going to be as good as the XM4 in due course, and decided to say, okay, we're not going to just change up the meta in a couple of weeks' time again when the pros decide to GA it, which he believes is pretty inevitable. We're just going to get rid of it now. So does that mean it's going to go in the professional scene as well? And also he mentions right here the fact that the QBZ is actually very, very good in comparison to the M4, as Octane says something similar.
Yeah, the M4 was just completely ridiculous to use. Just keeping it simple for you guys. It needed to be GA'd or changed in some capacity. So the initial proposed GA, by the time you guys are watching this, is probably 2 or 3 days ago. The initial change was getting rid of the muzzle brake on the AK-74 in exchange for eliminating an entire gun, which is by far the stupidest thing that I have ever heard of in my entire life. If you guys could not tell, I am not in support of this GA at all, but the state of the game right now, the amount of teams that don't want to play with the M4, we aren't going to play with it. So the initial change was no muzzle brake on the 74U in exchange for the M4. I didn't like that. It was my team, Atlanta and New York. Why would we trade an entire weapon for an attachment on a gun that really, in retrospect, doesn't make that much of a difference in the first place? And the consensus that we came to was we're going to take away the muzzle brake and the mag from the 74U, which is still not even close to balanced whatsoever in terms of a trade, but it's just kind of what we got to do because sub players refuse to GA it and they refuse to not use the barrel on it. The barrel is the main issue with the gun, the bullet velocity barrel on the 74U. Sub players refuse to not use that, so we're trying to do what we can because again, the logic of trading an entire weapon for an attachment is just beyond idiocy, in my opinion. Like I said, you guys couldn't tell by this video. This GA is the stupidest I've ever seen in my entire life. It's just not one that I'm in support of at all. And essentially the answer to that question is it does the exact same thing that the M4 did, but potentially better. It has a higher headshot multiplier, believe it or not. It has a 1.4 headshot multiplier, I want to say, instead of the 1.2 of the M4. Notch that. And it has a higher potential to bullshit someone. So I'm not entirely sure why we got rid of a gun and then replaced it with something that could potentially be a better gun. This guy's getting actually spawn trapped. I feel so bad. And then just replaced it with a gun that could do better than, you know, the one that we got rid of in the first place. But
so Octane clearly very frustrated with the matter. I mean, Parasite says a pretty interesting couple of points, I think, actually, on how the meta sits right now. Whoever used a faster, more agile AR and classified it a flex gun. Flex's role, and this is interesting, actually, point from Parasite, because I think people just say flex, and in reality, they kind of mean whoever's using the XM4, like, isn't the main assault rifle, is the flex player on the team. But, like, back in the day, in something like a World War II, the flex player was actually the player who would either use an STG or a bar, or would use a PPSH, would choose between guns that are good for certain roles, and would just, like, change based on the map. Whereas right now, effectively, you just have a do-it-all weapon is the flex, right? And that's kind of what Parasite's getting at here. Flex is a role that means a player is proficient in both AR and SMG playstyles. There actually isn't many actual flex players in the league. Most players just classify their second AR as a flex. This is why two-gun metas are great from a competitive aspect. SMGs do SMG things, ARs do AR things. Your flex isn't someone who uses a do-it-all gun. Your flex is a player who's responsible for pulling out one weapon out, depending on the situation, hill, map, etc. you happen to be playing on. Stop trying to force do-it-all weapons into competitive, because you're not disciplined enough to play your roles and situations appropriately. So I'm not exactly sure what he's going for here, whether he's like calling out the XM4 being too strong, of course, now that it's gone regardless, or maybe talking about the fact that the 74U is very good. I mean, the Slasher says right here, facts, big hacky. So yeah, gotta love me. Can't believe we allow one player on each team to run the best weapon every single year. So pretty interesting stuff. Thought I'd mention this as well from last night. These are scrim results between OpTic and Dallas. Josh McIntyre and the boys always coming out on fire on the competitive Call of Duty Reddit, recording all of this stuff. So pretty interesting to see the Garrison is still a dominant map for Dallas, right? 251-20. They're clearly really good on this map in the league as well, but the rest of the hard points go the way of OpTic. Seems like this meta is working out pretty well for them so far. Definitely a better set of scrims here than they had against Toronto yesterday. So they go 4-1 in the hard points, then 3 or 2 actually and 1 in the controls. They win the raid, they win the Garrison, they lose the check mid in a 3-2 fashion. So pretty interesting scrims set. Thought I'd mention it because you guys tend to enjoy it. And also thought I'd run through some Lion Man player cards as well. So CDL stage 1 cards, Soul Earners come third. And this is pretty incredible to me that Clayster leads assault rifles, all assault rifles, in hard points, kills per 10 minutes, damage per 10 minutes, in search and destroy kills per round, damage per round as well, and in control, objective kills per 10 minutes and damage per 10 minutes. So he gets the first 99 of stage 1. I think the way it works is because they're +2 in their records, they get a +2 added to like all their numbers. So that way there's some element of how well your team performed actually counts into what your rating is right here. But Clayster, despite being negative in hard points overall, is actually pumping out a crazy amount of kills per 10 minute and damage per 10 minutes. He does also depend like somewhat on the maps you play, right? Like if you're playing a lot of Crossroads, you're imagining you're going to get higher damage and higher like kills per 10 minutes. So therefore it does skew it somewhat potentially based on what map set these teams happen to be playing, but pretty interesting regardless. This I thought was also kind of cool. So Clayster says 0.9, but the good kind of 0.9. As Grim says, like, we're talking to Indra about this. I don't know how you guys are still capable of going dumb hard in effectively pool play matches after competing for so long. One of my biggest flaws is that no matter the opponent, going 100% in pool play is very difficult for me. Need the stakes, need the pressure. Octane coming in clutch right here with the Crimsix, does not try in matches. And Clay says as well, like, I don't know, man, I just got to prove something every time I get the ability to compete. Sometimes I mail it in for pools, but in a situation like this year, I've got the hunger to try and win as hard as I I can. People, or just myself, keep putting chips on my shoulders. And I thought this is interesting as well from Crim. You versus the guy she told you not to worry about. Envoy on the left. They did this like US Army sponsored thing with OpTic when they went to shoot their shot at a firing range. And Crim here on the right, an absolute seasoned veteran in the field. And this then was the Dallas Empire's card. So I mean, Huke gets a 97, understandably. So it really has been ILLey that's been somewhat underperforming, at least statistically so far this season. Like if we start to see better performances from ILLey, like this team probably gets even scarier than they already are, especially given his search and destroy. A 0.8 in search and destroy, not something you expect really from one of the most dominant S&D stars that we've had in Call of Duty history. And fair play to Crimsix as well, given that, you know, you wouldn't have expected him being the second best performing player on this team necessarily coming into the season. So he's definitely had a blinder so far. Thought this was interesting from Orcs. Just the final thing to finish off the video, as he mentions here in the edit game rules section, I noticed this as well. I'm sure you guys have also noticed this. There is a bomb drop option in the game, kind of like in Counter-Strike where you can run around and drop the bomb to your teammates if you need to in certain situations. Like let's say there's a teammate down there by the bomb, you can actually just drop the bomb down to him and then he can actually get it down on the site. So this is something which for some reason is disabled in play. I think it might add some nice elements of strategy. I don't really see a downside to at least trying it out, and given the options there, I mean finally they actually added it as an option and we're not using it in pro play, maybe it's something we could consider. As he's like, okay, why do we not have this enabled? It could add some cool elements of strategy. Maybe that's something the CDL should consider, at least in the rule set going forward as well. Might be cool to watch. Intrigued to hear your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy it, I'd greatly appreciate a like on the video. It really helps out the YouTube algorithm to know you enjoyed this content. Other people like you may enjoy this content as well, and have grown the competitive Call of Duty community. Thank you for watching as always, take care, and I will see you next time.